Hey everyone, welcome back to 51%'s Crypto Research Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Shaughnessy. Today I had the pleasure of having Afri on. Afri is very well known in the Ethereum community and for his current role at Parity. For those new to Ethereum, Parity is the second most popular client behind Geth. Ethereum's client is basically a gateway to view, interact, and verify the Ethereum blockchain, its series of smart contracts, and everything related to the network. It also allows you and provides you the interfaces to create transactions, mine blocks, and view key blockchain data. During this conversation, we hit a wide array of topics, including Parity's client on the Ethereum network, the Görli Ethereum testnet Parity is working on, and some on their interoperability protocol known as Polkadot, and a bunch of questions from Twitter. Be patient with this episode, as English isn't Afri's native language, German is, but it's clearly an episode that's worth listening to, as Afri has a ton of great information to share. As an aside, I wanted to take a second and share that 51%'s podcast has been downloaded thousands upon thousands of times, and we don't barrage you with any sponsors. All we want you to do is visit 51pct.io, linked in the show notes, to view our industry-leading institutional crypto research. This research is read by crypto firms, family offices, funds, analysts, investors around the world. All you have to do is add your email on 51pct.io, and we'll send you a sample report, and you'll be signed up to read all of our future alerts that are released on average twice a month, quality over quantity. With that, here's my conversation with Afri. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today on the podcast, I have Afri, who covers all things Ethereum and Parity. Afri, how's it going?
Oh, tell me how it's going.
Well, Afri, it's a pleasure to have you on. I think we should jump right in. Tell us about yourself and how you got started in crypto.
Oh, wow. You want the long story or the short version?
I guess the short one, just for time.
Yeah, the short version is I read a book about cypherpunks, and one chapter completely covered Bitcoin, and yeah, that's how I was sucked into the space, like both from all the technical perspective, but also like from the potential impact on economy and society and everything attached. Yeah,
that's interesting. So when did you jump into work at Parity?
In early 2017.
I guess let's focus on the Ethereum client that you guys have. You know, for those who are new to Ethereum or new to crypto, you know, what is the role of a client itself?
Yeah, what is an Ethereum client? It's the implementation of the Ethereum protocol in all its details, and to run an Ethereum node, a full node that holds the blockchain and the state and everything required, you need to run one of these clients. And the most popular clients are the official Go Ethereum client, Geth, and the Parity Ethereum client.
Got it. So what are the main differences between the Parity client and the Geth client, since they're the most popular implementations?
Well, Geth started out as official reference implementation developed by the Ethereum Foundation right from the beginning. And therefore, the Go Ethereum client was initially entirely written to run Ethereum only, whereas Parity, which was built by the team that formerly worked on the C++ client, had a more broad vision of creating an enterprise client that has additional features like permissioning or supporting other kind of networks, pluggable consensus, and many more features like this.
That's interesting. So, I mean, I guess in your opinion, moving forward, I mean, do you think that we really need all of these clients? Like, do you think it's a good thing that we have so many today? Or do you think that, you know, over time, we'll probably just go down to the most popular ones like Parity and Geth?
Yeah, well, that are actually two questions, both very interesting. So the first part is what I find very interesting about Ethereum, that when Ethereum launched, they had the idea, the initial core developers, to not only have one reference implementation like Bitcoin, but also have three. This is has many advantages, like making the protocol more robust, to allow more diversity in the client landscape, allow users to choose which clients they want to run, and but this also comes with challenges in making them in testing, especially, and making all clients very robust against consensus issues. The second part of the question was, yeah, right. Of course, as we see today, most of the users are running gas or parity. So it basically breaks down to people use the clients which are most performant and or most useful for their certain use cases. Yeah.
Interesting. That's very helpful. So Afri, I mean, one of the nearest term goals for you guys and events on the horizon is Constantinople, which is the next upgrade, or part of an upgrade for Ethereum, which is set for mid-January. So how have you been preparing for the upgrade, though? I mean, what's your role in the process at Parity?
Well, at Parity, my role is to coordinate releases and to make sure that the latest releases for Parity Ethereum include all Constantinople changes. And this involves creating a release as fast as possible. We have done this on Friday, I believe. So everyone who wants to be prepared for the hard fork should upgrade now.
Got it. That's interesting. So, I mean, you guys have come under a lot of pressure, though, to get all of these updates ready to go for Constantinople, not only by those who hold Ethereum, but by developers in the entire community. Do you think that the process could have been coordinated better, or in some way? It seems like in some cases it was a rush, but in other cases people wanted to get this update out.
Absolutely. So there is no defined process for hard forking on Ethereum. And if I remember correctly, after the Byzantium hard fork in 2017, we kind of discussed if we want to have like a more defined process and a much more accelerated hard fork schedule. But eventually nobody actually stepped up to sit down, write maybe a specification how such a hard fork process could look like, and nobody also enforced such a potential specification, and therefore there's a lot of room for improvements. And yeah, this is something that will most likely change in future. We are currently discussing to set up a team of people that want to voluntarily help Ethereum with hard fork coordination.
That's great. So, I mean, in the future, if you could, wave your magic wand, what do you think would be the best way to go about coordinating hard forks? It seems like having a centralized group coordinated could save a lot of time and a ton of headaches, but that kind of goes against the ethos of, a decentralized network.
Yeah, that's not about having like a management that enforces things. That's maybe I'm not entirely clear on how this could look like, but ideally, these are people that facilitate such a process in a way that they like make suggestions for the community, for the core developers, for everyone running a node, basically to stick to some certain defined process that everyone agrees on, and coordinate that everything required to get a hard fork done in a certain time frame. How did I start this sentence? They just ensure that everyone is like aligned with this vision of having a more fixed schedule. You know what I mean?
No, that makes total sense. So, I mean, hopefully your goal is to not have to deal with the headaches that you had to deal with during this hard fork, I'm assuming.
So two or three ideas I have in mind. The first would be to facilitate the how's it called, the EEPs, the Ethereum engineering proposals.
The EIP process?
No, the EEPs is something Peter recently suggested to have. Like, the EIPs are like improvement protocols, proposals for the Ethereum protocol. whereas the engineering proposals are more like how we standardize processes within the core developers or everyone who's like running infrastructure for Ethereum or on Ethereum. And these EEPs, they would be perfect use case for them would be to create like a Ethereum hard fork EEP, which defines like how could a hard fork schedule for Ethereum look like, what is required, what are the different phases of a hard fork, like testing, implementation, and so on.
That's
yes.
So yeah, it's really interesting. So the EEP is the Ethereum engineering process. That's interesting. So I guess one of my questions here is like, there's other blockchains out there like Tezos or others where they kind of have this built in where hard forks have to fit a certain code dynamic to be accepted by the network. I mean, isn't this Ethereum engineering process kind of just that same idea?
No, this is more like a process. How do you put this? It's like you can imagine it's like a document where in best case, if everyone sticks to it, we have like the ideal outcome of a scheduled hard fork every 9 months or something like that. So this is nothing really technical. It's like more like a coordination document.
Got it. That's interesting. Well, Afri, you're also spending a lot of time beyond the client on the Görli testnet, which is another project of Parity. I believe it's through Parity. Can you tell us, I know we're switching gears here, but can you tell us a bit about Görli and what you hope to achieve there?
Yeah, sure. The Görli testnet was a project at East Berlin Hackathon in September, where some people sat together and figured out that it would be nice to have a cross-client testnet that's more robust than Ropsten and highly reliable. And the idea was to create a proof of authority network which works across all client implementations. And the reason is we have three big testnets in Ethereum right now. This is the Ropsten testnet, which has been attacked multiple times and has like some kind of long downtimes because the proof of work is very unreliable because due to the nature of a testnet, the coins on the testnet don't have any value, and therefore no one is really incentivized to secure this network. After one of these attacks on Ropsten testnet in 2017, both the Ring-B proof of authority network was launched and the Coven testnet. However, both of these testnets are only they are only implemented for one client. The Ring-B testnet was only implemented for the Go Ethereum client, and the Coven testnet was only implemented for the Parity client. And the spec of the underlying proof of authority engine are too different, so there was no way to merge these efforts to have like one testnet for both or for even all the clients. And yeah, this is what Görli tries to be.
That's interesting. So what is the status of Görli right now? Is this something that's live, or is this something that you're hoping to release in the future?
Both, actually. So we run some, I call it pre-testnet. So it's live. We have 5 different clients already connected to it. So the current iteration of the Görli testnet is implementation of the Click engine. And we have the Go Ethereum client, we have the Pantheon client, we have Nethermind and the Ethereum JS client, and we are very close to finish the Parity Ethereum integration of the Click protocol. So right now, if you go to stats.görli.net, you see 5 different clients running on this proof of authority network.
That's interesting. So I guess my main question here for the Görli testnet is like, where does Görli fit into Ethereum as a testnet? Not in competition with the others, but I'm just guessing like, what does a reliable testnet mean for developers? I know it's a big deal for you guys.
So reliable means, for me, stable block times, a stable pool of nodes to connect to, a good and easy way to get testnet coins for any developer to hack around with smart contracts to deploy decentralized applications. And with the existing networks, there are some issues regarding this. I already mentioned that Ropsten is very unreliable. It sometimes has long downtimes. Imagine someone puts a strong GPU miner on Ropsten and then turns it off. So you can easily have like block times of several hours, which is super annoying when you like develop a application and you have to wait for your transaction to confirm for a very long time. And therefore, proof of authority networks like Ringbee or Coven are much more used by actual developers currently. But then there's a problem if you want like a specific parity API to test something in your integration, then you can't do it if you are Ringbee, or if you like build an application on Coven and realize that some features that Coven offers are not available on mainnet, for instance. So the Görli testnet is something that tries to be as close as possible to mainnet conditions, but also being as available and as reliable and as stable as possible for application developers.
That's excellent, Afri. So do you envision this testnet being used for decentralized applications before they launch, or do you expect it to be used for, say, Ethereum updates before they are launched, or both?
Kind of both. Mainly it's for application developers, because having a reliable testnet means you can build everything you want on it and without any limitations and test it. And also, since we have different client implementations with the ability to synchronize the Görli testnet, we can also test for consensus issues or potential consensus issues. We could even simulate hard forks like the Constantinople upgrade or any future upgrades. However, what we cannot do is simulate a hard fork under proof of work conditions like we did on Ropsten or on Scarcity. But that is not the scope of Görli. The main scope is being highly available for application developers.
That's interesting. So I'm just trying to think through the value proposition and the value drivers for Görli, like the reason why developers would use it. And you definitely hit on a lot of them. The main one, I think, being reliability. But how big of a deal is it that Görli's testnet will be open to all clients? How big of a deal is that in the developer world for those who are not aware?
It's a huge deal. It's I'm less of an application developer. I'm more like coming from the core developer perspective, but a lot of people approach me, and I know that this is a pain point. If you are on Ringbee, you cannot test parity integration. Coven is like different set of issues, and and Ropsten, as I mentioned, it's a big deal, and we have a massive amount of contributors already in this early stage of this testnet, and we have so many people approaching us and saying, yes, this is really needed, and I'm really happy we can realize this very soon.
That's great. So Afri, if everything goes well with Görli and it's launched and it's a great testnet, what's the end result for the Ethereum community here? Is it that the ecosystem gets upgrades and applications that are tested better before they're launched?
In a way, yes. So Görli will not be the general problem solver, but it will make lives for application developers much easier in future. That's what I believe, and that's why I think we can retire Ropsten soon if we succeed with Görli.
That's great. And does retiring the Ropsten testnet have any negative effects there, or do you think it'll be okay?
So Ropsten is a proof of work testnet, so nobody can go out there and say, so let's retire this, but eventually will happen if the developers will start working on a new testnet. They are no longer incentivized to run their own miners, and I believe if Görli will be successful, Robson will die on its own. But this is not like we pull the switch for Robson or something like this. As long as people want to use Robson, it will be used. And as long as you want to mine on Robson, you can mine it.
That's great. So we're not pulling the plug on anything, but over time it might go to Görli just because it's a better testnet. But Afri, I'm wondering, do you spend, we're circling all of Parity right now, which is great. I'm wondering if you spend any time on Polkadot, because I'd love to learn more about that as well. If so,
I'm actually not spending any time on Polkadot.
That's okay. That's fine. I really did want to get to a bunch of questions we had from Twitter and all, because we had so many. One of the questions that's obviously popping up a lot, I got a lot of emails on, was the freeze, the Parity fund freeze, where I think it was like 160 million got locked in. Parity's funds got locked up.
For a couple of users that have locked funds, this is still relevant, but the majority of the Ethereum community showed that they are not interested in helping these people. So, I could walk you through what happened, but I think this has been iterated over and over again. So I'm not entirely keen on going through all these steps now.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. I thought that it kind of fell off the cliff a little bit after a while. I thought it was like way more in the news in the past, and now it's not really discussed as much.
Yeah, it's not much happening in this regard.
So let's go on to, we got a ton of questions on Twitter. I'd love to ask you. People are really interested in asking you a bunch of questions. So, one of the first questions is, some people said that Geth and Parity account for most of the nodes on the Ethereum network, and I'm pretty sure you already said that. But do you think that one person's wondering whether or not you think we need even more diversity in the client ecosystem? It seems to me that we probably already have enough.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Do we need more diversity? We have like 8 or 9 clients out there, and everyone can basically choose which one fits best their needs. And I think we can encourage more teams to build even more clients, but in the end, I think diversity of clients is like almost perfect in Ethereum as compared to other blockchain environments. And in the end, users will use what I said before, which one satisfies their needs. This is mainly which APIs are available. Does this work with my application? Does this work with my infrastructure setup? Or is this performant enough to mine a block on it? And in the end, you see that clients like Parity or Guess are these clients that are run by the majority of people, because they are very popular because they have a strong developer team behind it that makes sure that these clients are very robust and very performant. And to build something as performant and as reliable as Guess or Parity are, you need a very big developer team, and you need to be very dedicated. In this context, it's interesting to see that Pantheon has like a very large development team, the Pegasus team building the Pantheon client. So I'm very curious to see how this client will perform in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had on the Pegasus team, and they covered a lot of their client and what they're doing. And for those who are unaware, you could take a listen to that episode. It's the Pegasus spoke at Consensus. Afri, do you have any thoughts on what they're doing over there? Do you think that their focus is like worthwhile, or do you think that their client isn't necessary since we have so many? It seems to me like they definitely have a niche that they're hitting on.
That's an interesting question. So I not really into like enterprise stuff. So their idea is to build like a performant, extensible, robust enterprise client. I'm not entirely sure what this means. I also think like this Parity already is like an enterprise client, but like does not advertise itself in this way. From what I see, the Pantheon client is pretty good. So it's like I'm not disappointed. I've used it a lot so far. And to answer your initial question, I think the overall vision of the Pegasus team is to be prepared for Ethereum 2.0. So they put a strong emphasis on research and implementation of the next big iteration of Ethereum.
That's interesting. So I have one more question on Pantheon, though. I mean, they're kind of positioning their client for enterprise use. Do you think that enterprises have problems today using Parity's client, or do you think that it's accessible to enterprises today?
No, I don't think that there are. I mean, you always have like problems or certain needs that are not entirely covered by any of the clients, but so far I think Parity is very successful in the enterprise world with its set of features.
That's great. So Afri, another question we have is, are permissioned chains useful and why? I think this is an interesting one.
Oh yeah, I like this question. So the short answer is yes. But let's have a look at what permissioning actually means. So you can have different types of permissioning. So you can have like a barrier of entry who can seal blocks, for instance. So a very easy approach to, a very simplistic approach to permissioning is the proof of authority networks, which allows only a defined set of validators, so-called authorities, to seal blocks and confirm transactions. And on top of that, you can also have like transaction permissioning. So you can basically whitelist certain entities on the blockchain to execute smart contracts or transfer values. And on a high level, I think permission blockchains are pretty useful, especially in for enterprises or business. The most prominent example is what I always use to describe this setup is like, imagine you have three big companies. Let's say, for simplicity here, let's say you have three banks that want to settle transactions in a certain way without actually trusting the other banks, but still being able to trust that what's settled on the layer they agreed on is actually something everyone can live with and is within a certain set of rules. And therefore, they create a permission network with three authorities, like for each bank one, and then they can settle their transactions or execute their applications on this network. And this is a use case this is certainly a valid use case for permission network, but admittedly not very interesting. For me personally, public blockchains are much more interesting, but that doesn't mean there are not any interesting use cases for permission networks.
Got it. That's interesting. So I guess more on that point, though, I mean, do you think that permissioned blockchains like, not permission, or I guess permission, but I guess a lot of people just call them private blockchains on, Microsoft or AWS. Do you think that they could survive in a future where we could just have like side chains on the public blockchains, which are, somewhat private? I'm just wondering what you think will happen to private blockchains if, say, Ethereum can reach true scale.
I would distinguish here between permissioned and private blockchains. Private blockchains is something you, keep private from the outside world. So you actually don't want to have anyone seeing your chain. So you encapsulate your blockchain in a way. Like the most simplistic example here is like a developer is running a development chain on his local machine with disabling discovery. Whereas a permissioned blockchain is still readable from the outside. You just have issues to access it, like in a manner to write on it.
That's interesting. So I'm moving on, Afri. Another question we have is, can Fura survive if Ethereum eventually scales? And for those who are unaware, Infura is a Spoke consensus that runs a lot of the backend work for Ethereum or supports a lot of the infrastructure.
Yes, from what I understand, is Infura a very innovative company, and they are in terms of research and product development ahead of time, and they put a lot of energy in improving the ecosystem and building outstanding infrastructure for Ethereum. And I think they will be around for a while, even if we solve the most pressing scalability solutions problems.
That's interesting. So, I mean, on scale, Afri, I mean, is there any like conflicts of interest that you face at Parity when trying to build, the future? We have another question that it's just like, how do you decide whether like to focus on layer 2 scaling with Polkadot when you're trying to build layer 1 scaling with the Parity client?
I don't think I get this question. How does one relate to the other? Could you just rephrase this?
Like, do you have a focus on where you're putting your scaling work? Like, would you like focusing on Polkadot for scaling, but you're also focusing on scaling at layer 1 with the Parity client? Do you have to decide like which one to spend your time on, or?
Yeah, got it. So Polkadot and Ethereum are two entirely different things, even for Parity. So there's like let's put it this way, and also there is no way to scale Parity on layer 1. We could improve the implementation a bit. We could fine tune it even further. We could gain like 10% or maybe 50% over time in performance, or maybe we can even think outside of the box and create a new client that is like 10 times faster than the current one. But to actually scale Ethereum, we need to coordinate with everyone in the Ethereum community, and this is no way related to anything we do at Parity in Polkadot.
Got it. No, that definitely clears that question up. I mean, so I guess just looking forward to the future of Ethereum, Afri, do you think that, I know you're on the front lines here dealing with everyone, do you think that the 2-year plan, some odd days to get to Ethereum Serenity upgrade is viable? Or do you think that this is something that's going to take much longer, say 5 or 10 years to get sharding and proof of stake and plasma, et cetera, all baked in?
Well, people that know me know that I'm very conservative on roadmap items, and I believe we can see something that is called Serenity in maybe 2020, but it will be not the full picture of what Ethereum 2.0 will can deliver or has promised. So I think we look at a realistic timeline of at least 3 to 5 years for a full Ethereum 2.0 implementation being in production. And there's still, the specifications are not final yet, and there are still new ideas coming up every once in a while. What could be Serenity? And for me, being more active on the legacy side, on the 1.0 chain, I'm very skeptical to see any Serenity code in production within 2 years.
That's really interesting. And I kind of argued the same thing, that it's probably too ambitious to get everything done within 2 years. If you had to pick one item that you think would slow down the entire roadmap, or multiple items, what do you think is the one item that's going to delay this roadmap, or do you just think it's everything altogether?
It's hard to grasp. I'm not very active in the research circuit, so I'm no way really able to comment what's going on there. That's just being honest with that. But from the developments in the past, when we, for instance, at Parity implemented the first phase of the hybrid Casper, for instance, the EIP 1011, which was then deprecated in favor of the beacon chain specification. This is something where I think, okay, this research might be very interesting, and there are like the top minds of the world working on like solving the most problematic problems of blockchain technology. However, I don't really see that we are getting there if we don't start implementing it soon. And I mean, we have now like 8 client teams working on Ethereum 2.0 client. also Parity is working on that, but the spec is still not final, and I don't know how we want to. You see, I'm very skeptical how we want to launch Serenity if we can't start moving on, implementing this actually.
That's interesting, Afri. So, I mean, don't you view it though? I mean, for those who aren't developers and that are looking at these blockchains, don't you view that, the long timeline, say 3 to 5 years, kind of as a threat? I mean, it seems to me like the door is open over the next 3 to 5 years for competitors to enter, whether that be Tezos, Dfinity, or others.
Yeah, sure.
That's interesting. So I have there's a very specific question on Twitter. I know you responded to it, so I want to make sure we get to it. We might need a little information on what these terms mean when you answer it. But the question is, how are centralized pre-mines decentralized when they're used to value consensus driving incentives like rewards and stake on each and every fork in perpetuity? I know there's a lot there.
Mm. Okay, that's a tough question. So let me open this. It's on Twitter, right?
Yeah, it was a pre-mine apologist asked you a few hours ago on my thread.
Yeah. So what is a centralized pre-mine? This argument basically dates back to 2014 when a lot of altcoins launched, and instead of going the Bitcoin way, instead of going the Satoshi Nakamoto way and just launching a provable Genesis block without any allocation, a lot of coins had this idea of like allocating a huge pre-mine to the developers, and there was this time when people just didn't realize this is even possible, and these developers, or like let's put it in quotes here, these developers who invented this became very rich within the Genesis block and cashed out on markets that didn't know what's going on. And this is why this pre-mine idea has a very bad connotation. However, you can also have like a allocation on the Genesis block that is like fair and reasonable, I believe. And this is something we can certainly see in any kind of token offering. If you like fairly announce that people can buy a certain amount of the pre-allocation by entering some kind of ICO, if you also fairly announce that you will keep a certain amount of the pre-allocated coins for development of the protocol, for development of the platform and the client implementations and everything else involved. If you are like honest and straightforward with it, I think this is nothing you need to be very afraid of in 2019.
Got it. That's interesting. So I guess zooming out, the problem that some people are seeing is that the initial developers had such large stakes at the start that now they'll have large stakes forever on every fork that comes out of a protocol. I'm not sure what Vitalik's stake is, but I don't think his mine was I don't think his percentage was an insane amount. Do you see this problem applying to Ethereum?
What exactly?
This pre-mine where the initial developers have too high of a stake.
Honestly, I'm trying to figure this out in my head. I have no idea how, if any developer has any pre-allocated funds, and if they have personally, then they just had to invest in the Ethereum crowdfund, didn't they?
Yeah, no, I know. I just don't know if I guess it's not a pre-mine argument, but just an initial stake argument. I'm wondering if you think that those who founded Ethereum early on have too high of a stake today, or an unfair amount.
That's a tough question. What is a fair amount to hold? I mean, we could go down this. No, I'm not going down this rabbit hole. I have no comment on that.
Okay, no worries. Well, Afri, is there anything that you're working on that you want to talk about that we haven't hit on? I know you're you work on a lot of stuff at once.
I think I'm working right now on 3 different things, and we covered them all pretty good in the past half hour.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, Afri, I mean, everybody's getting ready for Serenity and January 15th and 16th. Do you think that, people should temper their expectations a little bit on what we expect to get out of this update? Or do you think that people should be excited about, the continued development of Ethereum?
So this update is entirely only exciting for developers. So I mean, we delay the difficulty bomb for another year, so this is something miners can be happy about. But they aren't, because we also reduce the block reward. So trying to keep everything stable in the system. I personally think that protocol upgrades or hard forks shouldn't be exciting at all. I think we could hard fork every 6 months with just upgrading whatever is available and agreed on. And for Constantinople, this is just yet another Ethereum protocol update. It shows Ethereum network is alive. We can deal with new challenges, and we will do so in future.
That's interesting. Well, Afri, are there any projects or other teams that you're following that you're a huge fan of? Is there anything like, MakerDAO or ZeroX or anything there that you're a fan of?
Yeah, I am a big shill of DAI on Twitter. It's an amazing product, the DAI stablecoin. And the MakerDAO team is an amazing bunch of people.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, no, I wrote a report on them. I'm a huge fan of Rune and the whole team as well. Do you think that, what's your take on DAI and stablecoins? Do you think that like DAI will put Tether out of business, or do you think that DAI is just needed to kind of drive the next, the era of decentralized finance?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because no, DAI will not drive Tether out of business, not at least anytime soon. And that's very unfortunate. But it also shows that how much traditional businesses like exchanges, they don't really care about decentralization in the first place. They just use whatever gives them most profits. And integrating DAI would be very beneficial for the entire ecosystem. But most people just won't care, because if they could use Tether, why they should use DAI. And I mean, I lost the overview of how many stablecoins we have right now. I think DAI will be very successful in future, but it will take a long while, because the way how DAI is generated. I mean, what's the market cap of Tether? Isn't it like 6 billion or something?
I think there was, I want to say 3 billion issued off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's like just DAI will take a while, because it's growing organically based on the interest of people actually investing in opening CDPs. And I think there's a big need for huge quantities of stablecoins. And I hope the multi-collateral DAI will be the one that makes the breakthrough on this front.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think what they're doing is super interesting. And I just have a few other questions for you, just myself, Afri, that I wanted to set the record straight for some people that are listening. I mean, one of the problems with, or one of the concerns about Ethereum is that the size of the blockchain that each node has to download. I know some people have thrown around numbers like it's a terabyte, and Vitalik has argued back on that. Do you know how large the Parity client download is to download for a full node, or do you have any comments here?
Yeah. So let me just open my website. I created a website. It's called "Did the Ethereum blockchain reach 1 terabyte yet? .5chdn.co." And
what was the URL? Did the Ethereum blockchain reach 1 TB, or is it spelled out?
Yes, it's one number, TB. I can send you the link on Twitter. You can just link it somewhere if you want. So I'm running a full node, and this passes the blockchain and the state size. And right now the chain data, so the raw block size on disk is 130 gigabyte.
Okay,
and the state is, yeah.
So 130 gigabytes is nowhere near a terabyte.
No, and the state is around 10 gigabyte. And for an archive node, I created a website that's called archivenodes.5chdn.co. So you have the same metrics for archive nodes, which is 1.8 terabyte on disk right now.
Afri, can you let us know the difference between the archive node, the chain size, and the state size, which are in largest to smallest order of what you just stated, just the differences between the three?
Yeah, so the chain data, the blockchain data is basically containing all blocks with everything required, like headers, logs, and all the transactions in the blocks. This is what you require to entirely rebuild the Ethereum state from scratch, so you can run from Genesis through every block, execute all transactions, and recalculate the state. This is like the 130 gigabyte figure I just mentioned. The state size is basically the end of the computation of the Ethereum state. So if you execute all transactions from Genesis to the latest block, you end up with like 10 gigabyte of state. So you can imagine imagine transactions are equations, and you just run a calculator over all transactions, all calculations in the blockchain, and the end result has the size of 10 gigabyte. And an archive node does not only store the end result on disk, but all intermediate results after every block. So it's, in addition to the 130 gigabyte of chain data, it stores the state. It creates a state snapshot after each block on disk, and that's why.
Got it. That's a great overview, Afri. And I guess this ties in with what Parity's doing with their Feather Alpha Lite client. I'm not sure if you've worked on that or reviewed it, but does that Lite client play into these numbers at all? Like, would the Lite client have to download less data, or would it be easier to interact with the main Ethereum network?
Yeah, the Feather is our Lite wallet, which bundles an Ethereum Lite client, which only downloads recent headers, and everything else it requires fetched from other nodes in the network. So it basically tries to connect to full nodes on the network to get these missing data.
Got it. Does that, I guess, is there any problems with Lite clients, Afri? Like, are they able to actually validate transactions, or are they just basically storing the state of the network? I'm just wondering if Lite clients help us decentralize, or if they don't.
There's a trade-off. So the Lite client does not have any not any block bodies. The Lite client does not have the state. So whenever it requires information, it needs to get it from the network. So it does not really have decentralization. However, it gets this information from other nodes on the network. So it's kind of a trade-off here compared to, for instance, querying this information from Infura. So instead to going to one specified node to get like an account balance, a Lite client is able to get this balance from the network of full nodes that have this information available.
Got it. That's interesting, Afri. And I guess my last question for you, you've been around the space for so long, and I'm definitely interested in your take on the difference between the future of Bitcoin and Ethereum. I mean, do you think that one has to die for the other to survive, or do you think that both can coexist?
Yeah, not at all. I'm a big fan of Bitcoin, and I think Bitcoin will be around for a long while. And I also think Ethereum will be around for a long while. So I'm looking forward to use both in future.
That's awesome. I definitely agree. They're both going to be here for a while. Well, Afri, it's been a pleasure having you on, and where could people follow you on Twitter and learn more about you?
I'm 5CHDN on Twitter. 5 is actually a number. And yeah, you can follow me on Twitter and you will find my website. And basically, when you scroll through my feed, you will see what I'm working on.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Afri, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thanks so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Please rate and review the podcast to help other people find it. And visit 51pct.io and use coupon code TOKEN to get 20% off any subscription